The shout exploded across the Liberty Bell diner, silencing every conversation. Time slowed as the meaty fist of the leather-clad biker hurtled toward the face of the elderly man with silver hair. Robert "Bobby" Keegan didn't flinch. At 72, his weathered face remained calm, almost serene. But something happened in that split second, a transformation visible only in his eyes. The warm blue that had moments before, crinkled with gentle humor, hardened into cold steel, the eyes of a predator. The biker's fist missed by a fraction of an inch, as Bobby tilted his head with a precision that seemed impossible for a man his age. The momentum carried his attacker forward, stumbling awkwardly against the counter. Confusion replaced rage on the younger man's face. How could an old man move that fast? What he couldn't know was that Robert Keegan had spent decades ensuring that men like him missed their mark. Morning light streamed through the windows of the Liberty Bell diner, catching dust motes that danced in golden shafts across the worn linoleum floor. The small roadside establishment sat just off Route 66 in rural Pennsylvania, a slice of Americana preserved in amber since the 1950s. Bobby Keegan pushed open the glass door, triggering the familiar jingle of bells. The smell hit him immediately, coffee bacon and that unmistakable scent of maple syrup that had been soaked into the very walls over decades. "Morning, Bobby," Marge Wilson called from behind the counter, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun. At 65, she moved with the efficiency of someone who had spent a lifetime in this diner. Her husband's Marine Corps photo hung prominently near the register. Staff Sergeant Wilson hadn't returned from Operation Desert Storm. "The usual?" she asked, already pouring coffee into his favorite mug, one adorned with an American eagle. "You know me too well, Marge," Bobby replied, his voice a gravelly rumble that spoke of cigarettes long given up and orders once shouted across battlefields. Bobby settled into his regular booth, back to the wall clear sight line to both the front door and the kitchen entrance. Old habits. He'd chosen the same seat for 15 years, ever since moving to Millville, after Sarah passed. The diner had become his second home, its predictability a comfort to a man who had spent decades in unpredictable situations. The worn leather of the booth creaked as he shifted his body, still firm and strong, despite his years. His hands told their own story, scarred knuckles, calluses that never quite faded, the steady precision with which he added exactly 1 sugar to his coffee. They were the hands of a man who had done hard things but now contented himself with turning the pages of his morning newspaper. On the jukebox, Elvis crooned "Suspicious Minds," while local farmers discussed crop yields and weather forecasts. A group of seniors at the counter debated the upcoming midterm elections with the passion of people who had witnessed enough history to have strong opinions about its direction. "Hear about those troublemakers moving up from the South?" Frank Miller asked from the next booth over. A retired postal worker, Frank considered himself the town's unofficial news broadcaster. Bobby nodded noncommittally. He'd heard rumors, a group calling themselves the Patriot Brigade, making noise in nearby counties. "Sheriff Rogers says they're just passing through," Frank continued, leaning closer. "But my nephew works highway patrol, says they're bad news. Ex-military gone rogue, some say." Bobby's eyes flickered momentarily. His newspaper headline read, "Domestic Extremist Threats on the Rise." He folded it carefully, tucking it aside as Marge arrived with his breakfast, 2 eggs over easy bacon crisp, and her famous apple pie instead of toast. A Liberty Bell diner specialty she'd only served to her favorites. "You spoil me, Marge." Bobby smiled, the crevices around his eyes deepening. "Someone ought to," she replied with affection. "Still coming to the town meeting tonight? Library needs advocates against that budget cut." "Wouldn't miss it," Bobby assured her. The diner's door opened again, admitting Sheriff Rogers himself. The man looked tired, dark circles under his eyes, as he nodded toward Bobby before taking a seat at the counter. Bobby noted the tension in the lawman's shoulders, the way his eyes scanned the diner with unusual alertness. Something was troubling the sheriff, something he wasn't sharing with the townspeople who greeted him with casual familiarity. When Bobby finished his meal, he left his usual generous tip and a kind word for Marge. Outside, the October air carried the sharp promise of winter. His truck, a well-maintained Ford F-150 from the early 2000s, waited faithfully in the lot. As he drove the 15 minutes back to his farmhouse, Bobby couldn't shake the feeling that the peace of Millville was about to be disturbed. He'd felt this before, this pressure in the atmosphere, before a storm. In another life, he'd called it mission weather. The farmhouse sat on 20 acres bordering Lake Erie, well back from the main road, down a long gravel drive lined with oak trees, now blazing with autumn color. To casual observers, it appeared to be exactly what it claimed, the modest home of a retired veteran. Bobby parked in the detached garage and entered through the kitchen door, moving with the quiet efficiency that had become second nature over a lifetime of training. The house welcomed him with silence and order. The living room was Spartan, but comfortable. A worn leather armchair facing a television rarely used, bookshelves filled with history and military biographies, and a stone fireplace. Above the mantel hung his most prized possession, a photograph of Sarah on their wedding day in 1979, her eyes bright with promise and love. Bobby moved to his bedroom, where more photographs told the story of his life. Sarah, again older now, on the porch of their first home. And Elizabeth, their daughter, in her Harvard graduation gown, beautiful at 22, with her mother's red gold hair and Bobby's piercing blue eyes. Now, Dr. Elizabeth Keegan ran departments and commanded respect in Washington. Bobby smiled with pride, though he missed the days when she'd been small enough to ride on his shoulders. He changed from his diner clothes into work pants and a flannel shirt. Then, with practiced movements, he went to the hallway closet, reached past hanging coats to the back wall, and pressed a sequence of knots in the wood paneling. A soft click, and the false wall swung inward. The hidden room beyond would have shocked the good people of Millville. One wall held weapons, not the hunting rifles many locals owned, but precision tools, a customized Sig Sauer P226, a suppressed Mk-12 special-purpose rifle, and several combat knives in custom sheaths. Another wall displayed surveillance equipment, communication devices, and a computer setup that would impress government agencies. But most telling was the corkboard covered with maps, photos, and handwritten notes. At the center, a faded operational brief labeled Operation Orion Classified 1985, and surrounding it, surveillance photos of men with motorcycles, their faces circled in red marker. Bobby studied these latest editions' images he'd been collecting for weeks since first hearing rumors of the Patriot Brigade. His sources hadn't dried up in retirement. Once part of certain communities, you never truly left them. The phone rang, pulling him from his thoughts. The secure line. "Keegan," he answered. "Dad." Elizabeth's voice carried the precise diction she'd cultivated in her professional life, but underneath ran the warmth reserved for him alone. "Are you secure?" "Room 3, he confirmed, their shorthand for his protected space. "Have you seen anything unusual? Any signs of the brigade?" The tension in her voice was unmistakable. "They're nearby. Not in Millville yet, but close. Sheriff looks nervous." Bobby kept his responses efficient, a habit from years of secure communications. "What aren't you telling me, Lizzie?" The childhood nickname slipped out rarely these days. A pause. "The brigade isn't what they appear to be. Their leader, he's connected to something from your past." Bobby's eyes drifted to the Operation Orion file. How connected? Tyler Mercer is Conrad Mercer's son. The name hit Bobby like a physical blow. Conrad Mercer, the terrorist whose death had ended Operation Orion and nearly ended Bobby's career. The man whose blood had quite literally been on Bobby's hands. That's not possible, Bobby said, his voice steady despite the revelation. Conrad's family died in the compound fire. His wife and daughter did. Tyler was sent to relatives weeks before. He was 8 years old when you killed his father. Bobby closed his eyes, absorbing this information with the discipline of a man accustomed to unpleasant surprises. And now he leads the brigade. Yes, and Dad, he knows who you are and where you live. This isn't coincidence. The intelligence suggests he's been planning this for years. Bobby's tactical mind immediately began processing. What's his objective? Millville has nothing strategic. The natural gas pipeline that runs beneath Lake Erie. It's a critical junction point, and the maintenance station is just 5 miles from your property. A terrorist attack disguised as domestic extremism, Bobby concluded. How long do we have? Intelligence suggests days, not weeks. I'm trying to mobilize resources, but politics, Bobby finished for her. You need hard evidence before deploying federal agents. Exactly. Dad, I want you to leave. Come to Washington where I can… No. His response was immediate. This is my home. These are my people. The silence stretched between them, father and daughter, both understanding what remained unsaid. Bobby Keegan had spent his life standing between innocent people and those who would harm them. He wouldn't stop now, especially when the threat had come to his own backyard because of him. I'll call in some old friends, Bobby said finally. Get me whatever intelligence you can, securely. Be careful, Dad. Tyler Mercer isn't just seeking revenge. His psychological profile suggests a man trying to surpass his father's legacy. He's methodical, patient, and exceptionally well-funded. Understood, Bobby said. Love you, Lizzie. Love you too, Dad. After hanging up, Bobby stood motionless, processing. Conrad Mercer had been a true believer, a domestic terrorist whose religious compound in Montana had become a training ground for violent extremists. Operation Orion had been sanctioned after intelligence confirmed Mercer was planning simultaneous attacks on government buildings. Bobby had led the Delta Force team that breached the compound. In the chaos, he'd encountered Mercer himself, armed and using children as shields. The bullet Bobby put through Conrad's head had saved those children, but left psychological scars that contributed to Bobby's eventual transfer from field operations to intelligence. He'd never known about a son who escaped the raid. Bobby turned to his computer, sending encrypted messages to 2 people he trusted with his life. Then he checked his weapons, ensuring each was clean and functional. Finally, he opened a safe hidden beneath the floorboards, removing cache alternate identification and a phone not connected to his name. Evening brought a blood-red sunset over Lake Erie. Bobby sat on his porch swing, outwardly the picture of a retiree enjoying the view. Inside, his mind calculated angles, escape routes, defensive positions. The evening news droned from the small television he'd brought outside. The reporter's voice competed with the gentle lapping of waves against his private dock. Authorities remain concerned about the movement of the group calling themselves the Patriot Brigade, the anchorwoman said. Sources say the group, classified as domestic violent extremists by the FBI, has been linked to 3 bombings in the South over the past year. The broadcast showed grainy footage of men in leather jackets with a distinctive emblem, an eagle clutching arrows and a torch. Bobby's phone chimed with an encrypted message from Phil Donovan. Birds flying north. ETA tomorrow. Nest prepared. Phil had been with Bobby on Operation Orion, the team's weapons specialist, and Bobby's closest friend for 40 years. His arrival would strengthen their position considerably. Bobby replied, "Nest ready. Bring weather gear," their code for extra ammunition and body armor. The town meeting at the library passed uneventfully, though Bobby noted Sheriff Rogers continuously checking his phone, stepping out for calls 3 separate times. After speaking in support of the library funding, Bobby approached the sheriff. "Everything all right, Jim?" he asked casually. Sheriff Rogers started slightly. "Fine, fine. Just department business." Bobby nodded, not pressing. "Beautiful night for a drive. Thought I might take the Lake Road home." And the sheriff's reaction was subtle but unmistakable, a tightening around the eyes. "Wouldn't recommend it. Construction's got the north section down to 1 lane. Better take the highway." Bobby filed this information away. The Lake Road passed directly by the gas pipeline maintenance station. No construction had been announced. "Appreciate the tip," Bobby said, clapping the younger man's shoulder before departing. Instead of heading home, Bobby drove his truck to the outskirts of town, parking in the shadows of an abandoned grain silo. From his glove compartment, he retrieved night vision binoculars. The gas pipeline maintenance station sat nestled among trees, its perimeter marked by chain-link fence topped with razor wire. Security lights illuminated the compound, but Bobby could see no movement. Then, at the north access road, officially closed for non-existent construction, headlights appeared. A convoy of 3 black SUVs approached, stopping at the gate. Men emerged, speaking with the security guard. Even from this distance, Bobby recognized the posture of men with military training. One handed something to the guard, who examined it before nodding and opening the gate. Not force, then. Some form of legitimate-seeming access. The vehicles proceeded inside. Bobby captured images with a telephoto lens attachment on his phone, transmitting them securely to Elizabeth. Within minutes, his phone vibrated. "Falsified Department of Energy credentials," her text read. "Brigade has someone inside the government, working to identify." Bobby watched for another hour as the men conducted what appeared to be a detailed survey of the facility. Reconnaissance for their attack. By the time he returned home, it was past midnight. As he approached his farmhouse, Bobby immediately sensed something wrong, an imperceptible shift in the atmosphere that anyone else might have dismissed. He killed his headlights, continuing slowly down the gravel drive. There, a vehicle hidden among the trees where his property bordered state forest land. A black SUV identical to those at the pipeline facility. Bobby drove past his house, continuing to an old barn that sat at the edge of his property. Once inside, he moved with practiced efficiency, changing into dark clothing and retrieving a go-bag kept for emergencies. Armed with his Sig Sauer and a combat knife, he slipped into the woods surrounding his property. Moving silently through terrain, he knew intimately Bobby approached his house from the rear. Through the kitchen window, he could see 2 men in tactical gear, searching methodically. Professionals, not common thieves. Bobby circled the house, counting a total of 4 intruders. Their discipline and movement patterns confirmed his suspicions, ex-military, likely dishonorably discharged, based on their willingness to align with extremists. Dangerous but predictable to someone with Bobby's background. He considered his options. Direct confrontation risked escalation and would reveal his own capabilities. Better to observe and gather intelligence. For 2 hours, Bobby watched as they photographed his home, planted what appeared to be surveillance devices, and meticulously examined his belongings. They were searching for something specific, possibly confirmation of his identity or information about his past operations. Thanks to decades of paranoia, well-founded, they would find nothing. All sensitive materials remained secure in his hidden room, which the men failed to discover despite their thorough search. When they finally departed, Bobby remained hidden, tracking their vehicle to the town limits before returning home. Inside, nothing appeared disturbed to the untrained eye. He located and disabled the surveillance devices. They'd planted basic audio transmitters and a cellular camera disguised as a smoke detector. Dawn found Bobby on his dock watching the sunrise paint the lake in shades of gold and crimson. In his hand, he held the photograph of Sarah that normally sat beside his bed. He'd removed it before the intruders arrived, unwilling to let strangers touch even the image of his wife. "It's starting again, Sarah," he said quietly. "Thought those days were behind us." The morning breeze carried no response, but Bobby felt a familiar resolve settling into his bones. The weight of responsibility, once so heavy, now felt almost like an old friend returning. His satellite phone vibrated with an incoming message, coordinates, and a time. Phil had arrived. Bobby met his old friend at an abandoned hunting cabin 3 miles into the state forest. Phil Donovan's weathered face broke into a grin as they embraced. At 70, Phil remained barrel-chested and strong, though his once black hair had faded to steel gray. "You look good for a dead man," Phil joked, referencing the many times both had nearly died in service. "You look terrible as always," Bobby returned with a rare smile. They quickly fell into the shorthand of men who had faced death together. Bobby briefed Phil on the situation while they inventoried the equipment. Phil had brought weapons, ammunition, communication devices, and tactical gear that wouldn't be available to civilians through legal channels. "Maria's coming too," Phil mentioned casually. "She's flying in tonight." Bobby raised an eyebrow. Maria Vasquez had been their CIA liaison during Operation Orion. Her inclusion elevated the seriousness of their response. "Elizabeth pulled strings," Phil explained. "Maria's officially retired, but she still consults. She'll have resources we don't." By afternoon, they had established a secure operations center in the hunting cabin and developed preliminary response plans. Bobby returned to town, maintaining his cover as the unassuming retiree. The Liberty Bell diner buzzed with unusual energy when Bobby entered for his late lunch. New faces occupied several booths, hard-looking men in leather jackets emblazoned with the eagle emblem of the Patriot Brigade. They spoke quietly among themselves, occasionally eyeing the locals with thinly veiled disdain. Bobby took his usual seat, nodding to Marge, who seemed uncharacteristically flustered. "Everything okay?" he asked when she brought his coffee. "Those men came in an hour ago," she whispered. "Been making everyone uncomfortable, asked a lot of questions about the town who lives here." "They ask about me." Bobby kept his voice casual. Marge's eyes widened slightly. "How did you know?" They had a photograph, asked if I recognized you. Said they were old military buddies looking to surprise you. "What did you tell them?" "That you're a regular come in most mornings." She looked concerned. "Should I not have—" "You did fine," Bobby assured her, patting her hand. "Old colleagues, like they said. Just been a while." Bobby could feel eyes on him as he ate his lunch. He didn't turn, didn't acknowledge the attention. Let them make the first move. He didn't have to wait long. The bell above the door jingled and conversation in the diner faltered. Bobby didn't need to look to know someone significant had entered. The sudden tension in the room told him enough. Deliberately, he took another bite of his sandwich, chewed thoroughly, and only then turned his head toward the newcomer. The man who stood in the doorway could have stepped from the pages of a business magazine rather than the ranks of an extremist group. Tall and fit, with salt and pepper hair styled expertly, and a tailored leather jacket that probably cost more than most Millville residents earned in a month. His face showed breeding and education, high cheekbones, aquiline nose, and eyes that assessed everything with cold intelligence. Those eyes found Bobby immediately, and something flickered across the man's features. Recognition, anticipation, hate. Tyler Mercer had finally arrived. He crossed the diner with measured steps, his followers straightening respectfully as he passed. Without invitation, he slid into the booth opposite Bobby. "Robert Keegan," he said, his voice cultured, almost pleasant. "You're smaller than I imagined." Bobby took another bite of his sandwich, chewing deliberately before responding. "Most men look bigger when you're 8 years old." A muscle jumped in Tyler's jaw, the only indication that Bobby's words had struck home. "So you know who I am." "I know your father was a fanatic who used children as human shields," Bobby said quietly. "I'm sorry you lost him, but not sorry for what I did." Tyler's smile never reached his eyes. "After all these years, I expected more. The legendary ghost who led Operation Orion, the man whose name was whispered even in CIA circles. Now, just an old man eating lunch in a forgotten town." Bobby set his sandwich down, wiping his hands carefully on a napkin. "What do you want, Tyler Revenge Closure? Or did you bring your little brigade here for something bigger?" "Perhaps I simply wanted to see you before the end," Tyler replied, "to understand the man who created me." "I didn't create you." "But you did." Tyler leaned forward. "Every choice I've made, every path I've taken, all of it, began the moment you put a bullet in my father's head." Bobby met his gaze steadily. "Your father made his choices. You've made yours. Don't put that on me." Around them, the diner had gone unnaturally quiet, the locals sensing the dangerous undercurrents of this seemingly civil conversation. Tyler's eyes hardened. "You took everything from me. My father, my home, my heritage. But in doing so, you gave me purpose." He glanced around the diner. "These people, your neighbors, your friends, they have no idea who sits among them, do they? The things you've done in the name of country." "That life is behind me," Bobby said. Tyler's laugh held no humor. "Is it? Then why the surveillance equipment in your barn? Why the weapons hidden throughout your property? Why the encrypted calls to Washington?" He leaned closer. "We've been watching you for weeks, old man." Bobby showed no reaction to this revelation, though internally he reassessed the threat level. If they'd found some of his security measures, what else had they discovered? "You should leave Millville," Bobby said evenly. "Whatever you're planning, it won't end well." "On the contrary," Tyler replied, standing smoothly. "I believe it will end exactly as intended." He signaled to his men, who began filing out of the diner. As Tyler turned to leave, a young waitress accidentally bumped into one of the brigade members, spilling water on his jacket. "I'm so sorry," she exclaimed, reaching for napkins. The man, massive with a shaved head and prison tattoos, grabbed her wrist roughly. "Watch where you're going, bitch!" The waitress winced in pain. Without thinking, Bobby rose from his seat. "Let her go," he said, his voice carrying the unmistakable tone of command. The thug turned, sneering. "Mind your business, Grandpa." "I said let her go." Bobby hadn't raised his voice, but something in his manner made several patrons edge away. The man released the waitress with a shove, turning his full attention to Bobby. "What you gonna do, old man, bore me to death with war stories?" Tyler watched with curious detachment, making no move to intervene. "Walk away," Bobby advised quietly. "Shut up!" the man shouted, launching a meaty fist toward Bobby's face. What happened next would become legend in Millville. Bobby's movements were fluid, economical, a slight tilt of his head, the fist passing harmlessly by. Then a precise shift of weight, a subtle repositioning, and suddenly the larger man was off balance, stumbling forward into the counter. Bobby hadn't thrown a punch, hadn't laid a hand on his attacker. Yet he stood unharmed while the younger, stronger man flailed for equilibrium. The diner collectively held its breath. The thug recovered, face flushing with rage and embarrassment. He lunged again, this time with both hands reaching for Bobby's throat. Bobby sidestepped his movements crisp as the day he'd trained recruits half his age. One hand deflected the outstretched arms. The other delivered a precise strike to the solar plexus, not enough to cause damage, just enough to expel air from lungs. The attacker doubled over, gasping. Tyler raised a hand, halting any further aggression from his men. His expression showed something new, a calculating respect. "That's enough, Jackson," he said to the wheezing man. "Mr. Keegan has made his point." To Bobby, he added, "Impressive for a man your age. Perhaps there's still something of the ghost left after all." Tyler dropped several bills on the table. "For the water. And your lunch, Mr. Keegan. Consider it a professional courtesy between men of similar backgrounds." As Tyler led his people out, he paused at the door. "We'll see each other again very soon." The bell jingled with finality as they departed. The diner erupted in concerned voices, several patrons approaching Bobby with questions and congratulations. He deflected their attention, checking on the young waitress, who assured him she was fine, just shaken. Marge appeared at his side. "I've known you 15 years, Bobby Keegan," she said quietly. "Never once have I seen you move like that. Who are you really?" Bobby met her eyes, seeing the mixture of fear and confusion there. These people had welcomed him, trusted him, never questioning his past. He owed them something of the truth. "Someone who used to protect people," he said simply, "and might need to do so again." Later that afternoon, Bobby stood in his hidden room, phone to his ear. "They're here," he reported to Elizabeth. "Tyler made contact. They've been surveilling the house possibly for weeks." "What's your assessment?" His daughter's voice carried the professional distance she maintained when discussing operations. "Tyler's intelligent, disciplined, and well-funded. His men are ex-military, some with criminal backgrounds. They're planning something significant at the pipeline facility. We've identified a potential security breach in the Department of Energy. Someone provided legitimate-looking credentials for the brigade." "Can you move on them yet?" Bobby asked. "Not without concrete evidence of an imminent threat. The political situation is complicated." Bobby understood the constraints his daughter operated under. The government moved slowly, bound by regulations and oversight. But men like Tyler Mercer moved with deadly efficiency. "Phil's here. Maria arrives tonight. We'll establish surveillance on the pipeline facility and the brigade's base of operations." "Dad," Elizabeth's voice softened, "this isn't like the old days. You're 72 years old. These men are killers." "So was I," Bobby replied without emotion. "So was I." After ending the call, Bobby methodically prepared for the coming conflict. Weapons were cleaned and loaded. Surveillance equipment was tested. Contingency plans were developed and refined. Night had fallen by the time he drove to the small airfield where Maria's private flight would land. The woman who emerged from the small jet walked with the confidence of someone half her age. At 65, Maria Vasquez remained striking, her silver-streaked black hair cut in a practical bob, her movements economical and precise. She embraced Bobby warmly. "It's been too long, old friend." In the car, they dispensed with pleasantries, moving directly to operational planning. Maria had brought intelligence files on the Patriot Brigade, their known members, financial backers, previous operations. "Tyler Mercer has built something more dangerous than his father ever managed," Maria explained. "Conrad was a true believer, delusional but genuine in his apocalyptic worldview. Tyler is calculating. He uses ideology to motivate his followers, but his true goal is power." "And revenge," Bobby added. "Yes, that too." Maria studied him in the darkness of the car. "Are you prepared for what might be necessary? Tyler won't stop until one of you is dead." Bobby kept his eyes on the road, his expression unreadable. "I've killed before. I can do it again if required." "That's not what I asked." Bobby's hands tightened imperceptibly on the steering wheel. "I'm prepared to protect this town and its people, by any means necessary." They met Phil at the hunting cabin, transforming it into an operational command center. Surveillance feeds from cameras Bobby had placed around town displayed on monitors. Weapons and tactical gear were arranged with military precision. As the three veterans developed their strategy, Bobby felt a familiar sensation settling over him, the cold clarity that had always preceded combat. For 15 years he'd lived as Robert Keegan, retired veteran and quiet neighbor. Now he stepped back into the skin of Captain Robert Keegan, Delta Force operator and CIA ghost. Dawn would bring the beginning of their counter-operation. Until then, they would prepare, plan, and pray they weren't already too late. Morning arrived with heavy fog rolling off Lake Erie, shrouding Millville in gray mist. Bobby returned home, maintaining his routine to avoid arousing suspicion. He knew Tyler's men would be watching. Sure enough, as he collected his mail, Bobby spotted the black SUV parked 200 yards down the road. They weren't even trying to hide their surveillance anymore, a concerning development that suggested they were moving toward the operational phase of their plan. His secure phone vibrated with a message from Maria. "Package located. Motel on State Highway. 12 men, heavy weapons. Photos uploading now." Bobby reviewed the images, identifying several known extremists among Tyler's group. The weapons visible in some photos confirmed his worst fears. This wasn't just about revenge against one retired operative. The Patriot Brigade had come prepared for war. Sheriff Rogers called an hour later, his voice strained. "Bobby, I need to speak with you. In person. It's important." They met at the lake overlook, a scenic viewpoint well away from town and unlikely to be monitored. The sheriff looked haggard, his uniform wrinkled as if he'd slept in it. "They came to my house last night," Rogers said without preamble. "Mercer and 2 others. They had pictures of my wife at her workplace, my son at college. Said they'd kill them both if I didn't cooperate." Bobby felt a cold anger stirring. "What do they want from you?" "Police schedules, access codes to secure facilities, to look the other way while they conduct business in my town." Rogers ran a hand through his thinning hair. "Bobby, I've been in law enforcement 25 years. Never thought I'd consider betraying my oath." "You haven't betrayed anything," Bobby assured him. "You're protecting your family." "Who are these people, really?" The sheriff's eyes held desperation. "And who are you? Because the way Mercer talked about you, like you're someone dangerous." Bobby considered his options. Rogers was a good man, in an impossible situation. He deserved some version of the truth. "In another life, I worked for the government. Special operations, then intelligence. Tyler Mercer's father was a domestic terrorist I helped stop in the 80s. Rogers absorbed this, nodding slowly. "And now his son wants revenge." "That's part of it. But he's planning something bigger, an attack on the natural gas pipeline facility." The sheriff's eyes widened. "That would be catastrophic. Half the Northeast depends on that junction." "Exactly. I have friends helping me stop them, but we need to work quietly. Federal response is complicated. Because without proof of an imminent attack, they can't move against American citizens," Rogers surmised. Bobby nodded. "Even ones with manifestos advocating violence." The sheriff squared his shoulders. "Tell me how I can help. My family is in Millville. If these bastards are planning an attack, I'm not sitting on the sidelines." Bobby outlined a plan. The sheriff would appear to cooperate with the Patriot Brigade, while feeding them carefully selected information. Meanwhile, he would help Bobby's team gather evidence needed for federal intervention. "Your daughter," Rogers said suddenly, "the one who works in Washington. She's involved in this, isn't she?" Bobby's expression revealed nothing. "Better, you don't know specifics." As they parted ways, Bobby felt the tactical situation shifting. They'd gained an ally, but the confrontation was accelerating. Tyler wouldn't wait much longer. That evening, Bobby received an encrypted message from Elizabeth containing a single line: "Deputy Director Harris compromised. Exercise extreme caution." Bobby stared at the message, its implications sinking in. Deputy Director Harris, Elizabeth's immediate superior at the Department of Homeland Security. If he was working with Tyler, the situation was far worse than they'd imagined. The government response Elizabeth had been trying to organize would never come, not while Harris could block it. They were on their own. Bobby shared this development with Phil and Maria at their makeshift command center. Their expressions mirrored his own grim resolution. "So we handled it ourselves," Phil said, checking the action on his rifle. "Wouldn't be the first time." Maria nodded. "We gather evidence on Harris, separately recordings, financial trails. Once we neutralize the immediate threat, we can expose him. First, we need to determine when and how they're hitting the pipeline," Bobby said. "Maria, stay on surveillance. Phil, prepare our defensive positions. I'll maintain my cover and try to get closer to Tyler." As Bobby drove back toward town, night had fallen completely. His headlights cut through darkness that seemed to press in from all sides. The radio played Johnny Cash's "The Man Comes Around," its apocalyptic lyrics oddly fitting. The Liberty Bell Diner was closed when he passed it, but lights still burned inside. Through the windows, Bobby saw Marge cleaning up alone. He hesitated, then pulled into the empty parking lot. The door was locked, but Marge smiled when she saw him coming to let him in. "Thought you might be hungry," she said. "Saved you some pot roast." The simple kindness struck Bobby forcefully. These were the people he was fighting to protect, not abstract ideals of national security, but real humans with lives and histories intertwined with his own. As Marge warmed the food, Bobby found himself speaking. "I might need to go away for a while, after tomorrow." She turned, concern etching her features. "Those men from earlier, they're trouble, aren't they?" "Yes," Marge nodded, unsurprised. "I always knew there was more to you than a retired veteran who liked my apple pie. The way you carry yourself, the way you watch rooms and doorways." She set the plate before him. "My Charlie was a Marine. I recognize the look." "I was never good at hiding it," Bobby admitted. "You never had to not with friends." Marge sat across from him. "Is there anything I can do to help?" Bobby considered telling her to leave town to stay with relatives until the danger passed. But he knew she wouldn't go. This diner, this town, it was her life as much as it had become his. "Keep an eye out. Report anything unusual to Sheriff Rogers. Only Rogers, no deputies. And be careful." As he ate, Bobby felt a strange peace settling over him. Tomorrow would bring violence and danger, the world he'd left behind crashing back into his quiet retirement. Yet sitting in the warm light of the diner with Marge's comfortable presence nearby, he found himself grateful for the 15 years of normalcy he'd enjoyed. Sarah would have understood this moment, the calm before battle, the acceptance of what must be done. When he finished eating, Bobby left a generous tip and a sincere thank you. Outside, the night had cleared, stars emerging like silent witnesses to what would come. He drove home slowly, savoring the familiar roads and landmarks of Millville. At his farmhouse, he packed essentials, assuming he might need to leave quickly when it was over. Before going to bed, Bobby took Sarah's photograph from the nightstand, tracing her smile with his finger. "One last mission, love," he whispered. "For Elizabeth, for this town, for the life we built." He slept lightly, waking before dawn. After brewing coffee, Bobby stepped onto his porch to watch the sunrise. Lake Erie stretched before him, its waters catching fire as the first rays broke the horizon. His phone rang Phil's number. "They're moving," his old friend reported tersely. Multiple vehicles leaving the motel, heading toward town. Bobby checked his watch, 6:15 a.m. Earlier than expected. "How many?" "3 SUVs, approximately 12 men. Heavily armed. Alert Maria and the sheriff. Implement Alpha Protocol. I'll meet you at checkpoint 2. Bobby ended the call, moving with practiced efficiency. Within minutes, he had armed himself, donned body armor beneath a casual jacket, and loaded his truck with additional weapons and equipment. As he pulled away from his farmhouse, possibly for the last time, Bobby's mind cleared of everything except the mission parameters. The time for reminiscence had passed. The ghost had returned. The morning fog clung to the landscape as Bobby navigated his truck through the back roads of Millville. His weathered hands gripped the steering wheel with the steady assurance of a man who had driven through far worse conditions than Pennsylvania mist. In the rearview mirror, the rising sun painted the sky in hues of amber and crimson, the red sky of a sailor's warning. Checkpoint 2 was an abandoned fire watchtower at the edge of state forest land, offering commanding views of both the town and the pipeline facility. Bobby parked beneath the cover of pine trees and made his way up the rusted metal stairs, each step deliberate and silent despite his age. Phil Donovan waited at the top, a pair of military-grade binoculars trained on the road below. Without turning, he handed Bobby a steaming thermos cup. "Just like Sudan," Phil remarked, "except with better coffee and worse knees." Bobby accepted the cup, the ghost of a smile crossing his features. "And fewer scorpions." Through his own binoculars, Bobby tracked the convoy of black SUVs now entering Millville. They moved with precision, maintaining careful distances, not the haphazard procession of common criminals, but the coordinated approach of a tactical unit. "Maria's in position," Bobby asked. Phil nodded. "Downtown, watching the sheriff's office. Rogers is playing his part, called in his deputies for an emergency briefing to get them away from the brigade's path." Bobby's satellite phone vibrated. Elizabeth's number. "I'm secure," he answered, skipping preliminaries. "Dad's satellite imagery confirms increased activity at the pipeline facility. Harris has blocked my official channels, but I've assembled a team off the books. We're wheels up in 30 minutes, ETA, to your location, 3 hours minimum." Bobby calculated rapidly. "That might be too late. Intelligence suggests they're accelerating their timeline." "I know, but it's the best I can do." Elizabeth's voice carried the frustration of bureaucratic constraints. "Harris is meeting with the secretary in an hour. I've arranged for evidence of his involvement to be delivered during that meeting." "Good work," Bobby said, parental pride momentarily overtaking operational concerns. "Dad," Elizabeth hesitated. "Tyler Mercer's psychological profile suggests he won't be satisfied with just the pipeline attack. He wants to hurt you personally." "I'm counting on it," Bobby replied. The line went silent as Elizabeth processed the implications. "Be careful," she finally said. "I've already lost Mom. I can't lose you too." After ending the call, Bobby turned to Phil. "We need to move up our timetable. The brigade is splitting their forces, one team at the pipeline, another headed into town." Phil checked his weapons. "And Tyler? He'll come for me. Revenge is personal. He'll want to handle it himself." They descended the tower, quickly transferring equipment to Phil's nondescript van. Bobby sent encrypted coordinates to Maria, then turned to his oldest friend. "You take the pipeline team. Delay them, gather evidence, but don't engage directly unless necessary. Maria will coordinate with Rogers to protect the town. I'll deal with Tyler. Phil clasped Bobby's shoulder, just like Beirut in '83. Let's hope it ends better this time. As Phil drove toward the pipeline facility, Bobby headed into town. The Liberty Bell Diner would be opening soon. Marge always arrived at 6:30 to start the morning preparations. If Tyler wanted to hurt Bobby personally, targeting the people and places he cared about would be the obvious move. The diner's parking lot was empty when Bobby arrived, but Marge's ancient Buick was already parked at the side entrance. Through the windows, he could see her moving about the kitchen, unaware of the danger approaching. Bobby parked across the street, watching as the first of the black SUVs rounded the corner 2 blocks away. He reached for his phone, dialing Marge's number. "Liberty Bell, we open at 7, she answered cheerfully. "Marge, it's Bobby. Listen carefully. Lock all the doors immediately. Turn off the lights. Hide in the storage room, and don't make a sound until I call you again." To her credit, Marge asked no questions. "Okay," she said simply, her voice steady. Through the window, Bobby watched her quickly moving to comply, the diner falling dark as she retreated to the back. The SUV slowed as it approached the diner, 2 men inside scanning the building. Finding it dark and apparently empty, they continued down the street. Bobby released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Then his phone vibrated with a text from Maria. "Library targeted, 3 armed men, civilian staff present." The town library opened early on Thursdays for senior reading groups. Bobby's jaw tightened as he started his truck. These weren't military targets Tyler was selecting. They were the heart of civilian life in Millville. As he drove toward the library, Bobby activated the encrypted radio clipped to his jacket. "Sheriff Bobby here. 3 hostiles at the library. Civilians in danger." Roger's voice came back immediately. "En route with 2 deputies I trust. 5 minutes out. I'll be there in 2. Wait for my signal before approaching." The Millville Public Library occupied a converted Victorian mansion on Maple Street, its generous windows and ornate architecture making it a beloved landmark and a tactical nightmare. Too many entry points, too many sight lines. Bobby parked a block away, proceeding on foot through the neighboring gardens. As he approached, he could see 1 man standing guard outside the main entrance, while 2 others had presumably gone inside. The morning reading group would have at least 15 seniors inside, plus library staff. Hostages or casualties in Tyler's warped game of vengeance. Bobby circled to the service entrance at the rear of the building. The door was ajar, evidence that at least 1 of the brigade members had entered this way. Drawing his sidearm, Bobby moved silently into the building's shadowed interior. Voices echoed from the main reading room, a harsh male command followed by frightened murmurs. Bobby navigated through the staff area, years of training overriding the protests of aging joints. He paused at a doorway leading to the main floor, assessing the situation through the narrow gap. 2 armed men stood before the reading group, elderly citizens, and 3 staff members huddled together on the antique carpet. The brigade members wore tactical vests over their leather jackets, sidearms visible in shoulder holsters. One held a smartphone, apparently recording. "This message is for Robert Keegan," the larger man announced. "We know these are your friends, old man, your neighbors. We know you care about them." The hostages looked confused at the mention of Bobby's name. In his quiet retirement, none of them knew about his past. "You have 1 hour to surrender yourself at the town square," the man continued, speaking to the camera. "For every minute you're late, 1 of these good people dies. Their blood will be on your hands." Bobby weighed his options. The reading room had only 2 exits: the main entrance, where the 3rd Brigade member stood guard, and the doorway where Bobby now concealed himself. The gunmen were experienced alert. A frontal assault risked civilian casualties. His radio vibrated silently. Rogers and his deputies had arrived. Bobby keyed his microphone twice the signal to hold position, then eased his phone from his pocket, typing a message to Maria. Library situation. Need distraction at front entrance. Non-lethal. Her response came seconds later, 3 minutes. Bobby used those minutes to silently reposition himself behind a massive oak bookcase near the hostages. From this vantage point, he could strike quickly once the distraction came. Precisely 3 minutes later, a tremendous crash sounded from the front of the building, followed by shouts and the blaring of car alarms. Both gunmen turned toward the noise, their attention momentarily diverted. Bobby moved. Decades of training compressed into fluid motion as he emerged from cover. Before either gunman could react, Bobby had crossed the space between them. His first strike, a precision blow to the larger man's throat, collapsed the windpipe without killing. As the man dropped gasping, Bobby pivoted to the second attacker. This one managed to draw his weapon, but Bobby was already inside his guard. A wrist lock applied with the practiced pressure of countless repetitions produced an audible crack. The gun clattered to the floor as Bobby delivered a single decisive strike to the temple, rendering the man unconscious. The entire sequence had taken less than 5 seconds. The hostages stared in stunned silence as Bobby retrieved the fallen weapons. "Everyone stay down," he instructed calmly. "Sheriff's officers are outside." Bobby keyed his radio. 2 neutralized inside. 1 still at main entrance. "We've got him," came Rogers' immediate response. "Area secure." Only then did the reality of what they'd witnessed begin to register with the hostages. Their friend and neighbor, the quiet retiree who volunteered at book drives and donated generously to the library fund, had just dispatched 2 armed terrorists with military efficiency. Martha Kellerman, 82, and president of the reading group, found her voice first. "Bobby Keegan, what in heaven's name was that?" Bobby managed a reassuring smile as he zip-tied the unconscious brigade members. "Used to teach self-defense, Martha. Now, let's get everyone outside safely." Sheriff Rogers and his deputies secured the library as Bobby led the hostages out. Emergency vehicles had begun to arrive, their lights painting the Victorian facade in pulses of red and blue. "They were recording," Bobby told Rogers quietly. "Sending a message to me. Tyler's making this personal." The sheriff nodded grimly. "We've got reports of brigade members at the school, too. It's closed for teacher development today, but the administrative staff is there." Bobby's phone vibrated with another message from Phil. "Pipeline team deploying explosives at junction points. At least 8 men, heavy weapons. Request instructions." The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. Tyler was forcing them to divide their resources, creating multiple crisis points simultaneously. "Rogers, take your deputies to the school," Bobby decided. "Maria will coordinate with you. I need to get to the pipeline facility." "What about these people?" Rogers gestured to the confused library hostages now being attended by paramedics. "Get them somewhere safe and keep officers with them. Tyler's not done yet." As Bobby jogged back to his truck, his secure phone rang again. "Elizabeth." "The secretary has detained Harris," she reported without preamble. "My team is airborne, but we've got another problem. Tyler Mercer just broadcast footage of the library situation on extremist message boards, naming you specifically as a former Delta Force operator and CIA asset. Your cover is completely blown." Bobby absorbed this with grim resignation. His quiet retirement was officially over. "Broadcast works both ways," he noted. "Now we have concrete evidence of terrorist threats against civilians." "Yes, but—" Elizabeth hesitated. Dad, they're calling for supporters nationwide to target anyone connected to you. Sarah's grave, our old house in Virginia, my office in Washington. This is bigger than just Millville now. Bobby's hand tightened on the steering wheel as he accelerated toward the pipeline facility. Tyler had expected this outcome, wanted it even. The Patriot Brigade wasn't just planning one attack. They were inciting a coordinated wave of domestic terrorism with Bobby as the catalyst. Focus on Washington, Bobby instructed his daughter. I'll handle things here. My team will be there soon, Elizabeth promised. Just stay alive until then. The road to the pipeline facility wound through dense forest before emerging onto cleared land surrounded by security fencing. As Bobby approached, he could see smoke rising from the main administrative building. The guard booth stood empty, its window shattered. He parked well back from the entrance, concealing his truck among the trees. Using binoculars, he surveyed the compound. 2 brigade SUVs were parked haphazardly near the main building. Armed men moved between equipment nodes, placing what appeared to be explosive charges at critical junctions. Phil's van was nowhere in sight, suggesting he'd taken a more circumspect approach. Bobby activated his radio on their private channel. Position, he asked softly. Northeast corner maintenance shed, Phil replied. They've got the control room. Primary technician wounded but alive. I count 8 tangos placing charges on the main distribution manifolds. Casualties, 2 security guards down, 1 pipeline employee unaccounted for. Bobby considered their options. The facility was too large for just 2 men to secure even with their experience. Direct confrontation would be suicide. Can you access the fire suppression system? Bobby asked. Possibly. Old-school sprinklers in the main building, but the pipeline junctions have halon gas systems. Trigger them remotely. I'll create a diversion at the main gate, draw some of them out. Bobby returned to his truck, retrieving a small drone from his equipment bag. The consumer model had been heavily modified with military-grade control systems and a specialized payload. He launched the drone, piloting it high above the facility before bringing it into position over the parked SUVs. At his command, the drone released its payload, a homemade incendiary device that struck the first vehicle with pinpoint accuracy. The explosion ripped through the SUV, triggering secondary detonations as the ammunition inside caught fire. Black smoke billowed upward as men ran from the building, shouting in confusion. Simultaneously, klaxons blared across the facility as the fire suppression systems activated. Dense halon gas deployed around the pipeline junctions, obscuring visibility and forcing the brigade members to abandon their work placing explosives. Bobby used the chaos to approach the perimeter fence, cutting through the chain link with military-grade shears. By the time he entered the compound, Phil had joined him, his weathered face grim beneath a tactical cap. Charges are still in place, Phil reported. They were using remote detonators, military grade. Can you disarm them? Phil nodded. Need 10 minutes per junction. There are 3. I'll secure the control room. Buy you time. They separated Phil, moving low and fast, despite his age, heading for the first junction. Bobby approached the main building from the blind side, away from the burning vehicles. Inside, the sprinkler system had soaked everything. The control room lay at the center of the building, visible through glass walls. 2 brigade members remained inside, holding a terrified technician at gunpoint while attempting to override the emergency shutdown protocols. Bobby moved silently through the corridors, water dripping from his clothes and hair. At 72, most men would be home watching television or playing with grandchildren. Instead, he was stalking armed terrorists through a critical infrastructure facility. The absurdity wasn't lost on him. When he reached the control room door, Bobby paused, assessing. The 2 men inside were focused on the computer systems, their backs partially turned. The hostage, a middle-aged man in a soaked dress shirt, sat rigid with fear. Bobby drew his sidearm and entered in one fluid motion. "Federal agent," he announced, his voice carrying the unmistakable tone of authority. "Weapons down. Hands where I can see them." Both men froze momentarily. Then the larger one spun, raising his weapon. Bobby fired once, the shot precisely placed center mass. The man collapsed backward over a console. The second terrorist was smarter, grabbing the technician and using him as a shield. "Back off, old man, or I paint the walls with his brains." Bobby held his position, sidearm unwavering. "You're not walking out of here. Pipeline's already in emergency shutdown. Charges can't be detonated remotely anymore. Your friends outside are either running or dead." Uncertainty flickered across the gunman's face. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Bobby's eyes, cold professional, revealed nothing but absolute conviction. "Your team at the library is in custody. The school team is surrounded. Tyler miscalculated." The mention of Tyler's name visibly rattled the man. "How do you—" "Because I've been hunting men like you for 50 years, Bobby replied evenly. "Now drop the weapon or join your friend." Something in Bobby's demeanor, the complete absence of doubt or hesitation, finally registered. The man released his hostage, lowering his weapon. "Wise choice," Bobby said, moving forward to secure him. Outside, the facility had fallen eerily quiet. Through his earpiece, Bobby heard Phil's voice. "First junction clear. Moving to second." Bobby secured the brigade member with zip ties, then turned to the shaken technician. "Can you lock down the facility systems? Prevent remote access." The man nodded, fingers already flying across the keyboard. "Emergency protocols are holding, but they managed to upload some kind of malware before you arrived. Isolate it if you can. Help is on the way." Bobby's radio crackled with Maria's voice. "School secured. All brigade members in custody. No civilian casualties." A wave of relief washed over him, though he kept his expression neutral. "Any sign of Tyler Mercer?" "Negative. Not present at any of the known targets." Bobby frowned. If Tyler wasn't leading either the library or pipeline teams, where was he? The answer came seconds later as Bobby's secure phone rang an unknown number. "Keegan," he answered. "Hello, Ghost." Tyler Mercer's cultured voice carried a note of satisfaction that sent warning signals through Bobby's mind. "Impressive work today. My teams at the library and school were just pawns, of course. Sacrificial pieces in our game." "There's no game, Tyler. It's over. Your men are in custody. Your bombs disabled." Tyler's laugh held genuine amusement. "You think so small, just like my father said you did. This was never about the pipeline, or the library, or even the school." Cold realization dawned. This was about drawing us out, dividing our resources. Finally, he understands. While you and your friends were racing around town, my real team has been quite busy elsewhere. Tell me, Ghost, when did you last check your home, your precious farmhouse by the lake? Bobby's blood ran cold. What have you done? Why don't you come see for yourself? I'm enjoying the view from your porch right now. The lake is particularly beautiful this morning. The line went dead. Bobby turned to Phil, who had entered the control room after securing the junction points. No words were needed between men who had operated together for decades. Phil nodded once. "Go. I've got this secured until Elizabeth's team arrives." Bobby moved with cold efficiency, briefing Maria via radio as he drove. Tyler had played them masterfully, creating multiple diversions to draw attention away from his true target. The farmhouse had been Bobby's sanctuary for 15 years. Every defensive measure, every security system had been designed with one assumption that Bobby would be there to activate them. In his absence, the property was vulnerable. As he approached the long driveway leading to his home, Bobby killed the engine and proceeded on foot through the woods he knew by heart. Each step was placed with the care of a lifetime's training, making no sound, despite the carpet of autumn leaves. The farmhouse appeared undisturbed at first glance, sitting peacefully against the backdrop of Lake Erie. But Bobby's trained eye caught the subtle signs, tire tracks on the normally pristine lawn curtains, positioned slightly differently than he'd left them. Through binoculars, he scanned the property methodically. 2 men with rifles on the boathouse roof. Another visible through the kitchen window. A 4th patrolling the perimeter. And on the porch, seated comfortably in Bobby's favorite chair, with a glass of bourbon in hand, Tyler Mercer himself. The son of Conrad Mercer had made himself at home in his enemy's sanctuary. Bobby considered his approach. The most direct option, a frontal assault, would be expected. Tyler would have prepared for it, positioned his men accordingly. But the lake offered another possibility. Moving silently through the woods, Bobby circled to the shoreline north of his property. Years ago, he'd installed an underwater access point, a sealed tube containing emergency equipment, accessible only if you knew exactly where to look. The cold October water sent shock waves through his system as Bobby waded in, but decades of training in far worse conditions allowed him to push through the discomfort. Underwater, he located the hidden cache by feel alone, extracting a waterproof bag containing specialized equipment. Minutes later, Bobby emerged silently behind his boathouse, now dressed in a wetsuit over his clothes and armed with additional weapons from his cache. The 2 guards on the roof remained oblivious, their attention focused outward rather than at the water. Bobby scaled the boathouse using handholds he'd built specifically for this purpose, one of many contingencies he'd prepared during 15 years of peaceful retirement. At the edge of the roof, he paused, listening to the guards' conversation. "How long we gotta wait? That old man ain't coming back here. Mercer says he will. Says he knows him better than we do. Seems like a lot of trouble for one retired spook. This ain't about him. It's about sending a message. After today, every Fed and agent in the country will know you come after us. We come after everything you love." Bobby emerged over the edge of the roof in complete silence, neutralizing the first guard with a precise chokehold before the man registered his presence. The second guard turned at the sound of his partner collapsing. But Bobby was already in motion, a lightning strike of focused violence that ended with the man unconscious beside his companion. After securing both with zip ties and gags, Bobby assessed the situation below. Through the boathouse window, he could see Tyler still on the porch, now speaking on a phone. The patrol guard had moved to the front of the property, presumably watching for Bobby's approach by road. That left the man in the kitchen likely searching for intelligence or valuables. Bobby entered the boathouse through the roof hatch, descending the ladder to the main floor, where he kept his fishing equipment and small rowboat. Another hidden panel revealed a tunnel, originally a Prohibition-era smuggling route that Bobby had discovered and reinforced years ago. The narrow passage led directly to the cellar of the main house, designed as an escape route, but now serving as Bobby's means of infiltration. The irony wasn't lost on him. In the cellar, Bobby paused to listen to the movements above. Footsteps crossed the kitchen floor, heavy, careless. The brigade member upstairs clearly didn't expect resistance. Bobby ascended the cellar stairs with practiced silence, emerging into the kitchen pantry. Through the slats in the door, he could see the intruder, a heavy-set man, methodically going through Bobby's cabinets, occasionally pocketing small items of value. When the man turned toward the refrigerator, Bobby struck. 2 steps brought him behind the intruder. A precision strike to the nerve cluster at the base of the skull dropped the man without a sound. After securing this third adversary, Bobby moved to the living room, keeping low beneath the windows. The patrol guard would be circling back toward the front porch soon, and Tyler himself remained outside, still apparently on his phone. Bobby's home looked different through the lens of combat. Not the sanctuary he'd built, but a tactical environment with cover points, choke points, and danger zones. The family photos, the comfortable furniture, Sarah's antique clock, all had been transformed into variables in an equation of survival. He positioned himself beside the front door, listening to Tyler's voice from the porch. "Of course, I'm sure," Tyler was saying to whoever was on the phone. "The ghost will come for his home. Men like him are creatures of territory and ritual. He'll come, and when he does, we'll have the leverage we need." Bobby prepared to make his move as he heard the patrol guard approaching the porch steps. "Anything?" Tyler asked. "All clear on the perimeter," the guard reported. "No sign of approach by road or woods." "He'll come," Tyler repeated with absolute certainty. "My father said Keegan was like a wolf. He'll always return to his den, especially when it's threatened." Bobby had heard enough. Tyler's obsession with his father's assessment had created a blind spot. The assumption that Bobby would behave as Conrad Mercer had predicted decades ago. Moving with the fluid grace that had made him legendary among a generation of special operators, Bobby emerged from the front door, weapon trained on Tyler's head, before either man on the porch registered his presence. "Your father was wrong about many things," Bobby said coldly, "including me." Tyler froze the bourbon glass halfway to his lips. The patrol guard reached for his weapon, but stopped when Bobby shifted his aim momentarily. "Don't," Bobby advised. "You're outclassed." To his credit, Tyler recovered quickly, a smile spreading across his handsome features. "Right on time, Ghost. Though I admit I didn't expect you to come through the house." "Put the phone down." Slowly. Tyler complied, placing his phone on the small table beside Bobby's chair. "You've lived up to your reputation today. My father said you were formidable, but I think even he underestimated you." "Your men are down," Bobby informed him. "At the pipeline, the library, the school. Your grand plan failed." Tyler shook his head, still smiling. "Failed, on the contrary. Everything has proceeded exactly as intended." He gestured toward his phone. "Turn on the news, Ghost. Any channel." Bobby kept his weapon trained on Tyler while reaching for the remote to the small television mounted on the porch wall, an indulgence for watching baseball games on summer evenings. The screen flickered to life, showing a breaking news report. The anchor's voice was grave, as footage played of brigade members at the library and pipeline facility being taken into custody. Federal authorities have confirmed coordinated terrorist threats across multiple states today, apparently in response to counterterrorism operations in western Pennsylvania. Extremist groups associated with the self-styled Patriot Brigade have claimed responsibility, releasing manifestos naming former federal operative Robert Keegan as their primary target. The screen showed Bobby's military photograph from decades ago alongside images of the Millville Library and pipeline facility. Similar threats have been reported at federal buildings in Ohio, Michigan, and New York, with authorities implementing emergency security protocols nationwide. The Department of Homeland Security has raised the national threat level to orange, indicating high risk of terrorist activity. Tyler's smile widened as Bobby absorbed the implications. "You see, this was never about killing you or destroying one pipeline. It was about creating a movement. My father's vision, but with my execution. He tried to fight the government head-on and failed. I've learned from his mistakes." "By becoming exactly what he was, a terrorist," Bobby said flatly. Tyler's expression hardened. "A revolutionary." My father wanted to tear down a corrupt system. I'm showing the world how vulnerable that system truly is, how one man you can become the spark that ignites nationwide resistance. It won't work, Bobby stated with absolute conviction. These groups have no central leadership, no real coordination. They'll be rounded up within days. Some will. Others will inspire more to join the cause. It's already happening. Tyler gestured to the television where reports of additional threats continued to emerge. Today's actions will inspire 100 more tomorrow, 1,000 next week. The movement has begun, Ghost, and you're the catalyst that made it possible. Bobby recognized the dangerous truth in Tyler's words. The man wasn't just seeking personal revenge, he was orchestrating something far more insidious. Using Bobby's past as a rallying cry, he had created the conditions for ongoing domestic terrorism with or without his direct involvement. "And what now?" Bobby asked. "You've made your point, revealed my identity, set your movement in motion. What's your end game here?" Tyler leaned forward, his expression intense. Now I complete my father's work. I kill the legendary ghost the bogeyman federal agents whisper about. I make you a martyr for my cause." The patrol guard shifted nervously, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "You won't leave this porch alive," Tyler continued conversationally. "My men have orders to burn this place to the ground with both of us inside if necessary. A fitting end for both the man who killed my father and the son who avenged him." Bobby's tactical mind processed this threat instantly. Tyler was willing to die here, had perhaps planned for this outcome from the beginning. A murder-suicide that would elevate him to legendary status among his followers. "There's just one problem with your plan," Bobby replied calmly. "What's that? You assume I came alone." At that precise moment, the distinct sound of a rifle bolt being drawn back echoed from the direction of the lake. The patrol guard's head snapped toward the noise. "I wouldn't," came Maria Vasquez's voice from somewhere in the trees, "not unless you want to be breathing through a new hole in your forehead." Tyler's composure cracked for the first time, his eyes darting between Bobby and the unseen threat. "You're bluffing. Your friends are at the pipeline facility." "Some are," Bobby acknowledged. "Others have been watching this property since you arrived. Did you really think I wouldn't have contingencies for my home being compromised?" As if to emphasize his point, Sheriff Rogers' voice came over a bullhorn from the front drive. "This is the Millville Sheriff's Department. The property is surrounded. All occupants come out with your hands visible." The patrol guard looked to Tyler for instructions, panic evident in his expression. Tyler's face had transformed, the cultivated charm replaced by cold fury. "My father said you were lucky, not good. Seems he was right about that at least." "It was never about luck," Bobby replied. "Your father failed because he underestimated his opponents, just like you're doing now." For a moment, tension crackled between them. Two men from different generations, different ideologies, connected by violence, decades apart. Then Tyler moved with surprising speed, producing a small pistol from his jacket pocket. But Bobby was already in motion, decades of training compressed into a single fluid response. His hand struck Tyler's wrist with precision, redirecting the weapon as it discharged. The bullet shattered the porch window as Bobby closed the distance, delivering a punishing strike to Tyler's solar plexus. As Tyler doubled over, gasping, Bobby disarmed him with practiced efficiency. The patrol guard made a desperate lunge for his own weapon, only to freeze as a rifle shot kicked up splinters from the porch railing inches from his hand. "Next one removes your fingers," Maria called out calmly. "Your choice." The guard slowly raised his hands in surrender. Bobby secured Tyler with zip ties as Sheriff Rogers and his deputies approached the house. The self-styled revolutionary leader glared up at Bobby with undisguised hatred. "This changes nothing," Tyler spat. "The movement has begun. You've lost everything, your anonymity, your peace, your home. I've won." Bobby studied the younger man dispassionately. "Your father said something similar before he died. He was wrong, too." As Rogers's deputies took custody of Tyler and his men, Maria emerged from the tree line, her rifle held casually but professionally. Despite her 65 years, she moved with the confident grace of a lifetime operator. "Perimeter clear," she reported. "We got the two from the boathouse as well." Bobby nodded his thanks as his secure phone rang. "Elizabeth." "Dad, are you all right?" The professional calm in her voice had cracked, revealing the daughter beneath the federal director. "I'm fine. Tyler's in custody. Property secured." Elizabeth exhaled audibly. "Thank God. We're 20 minutes out. The Secretary has authorized full federal response to all brigade-related threats nationwide. Harris is singing like a canary trying to save himself. And Washington. Secure. The threats there were mostly bluffs. A few brigade sympathizers attempted to approach my office, but security handled it." Bobby looked out over Lake Erie, its waters now sparkling in the midday sun. The peaceful scene contrasted sharply with the violence that had unfolded across his property. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. Elizabeth hesitated. "Officially, you'll be placed in protective custody while we assess ongoing threats. Unofficially, you might need to disappear for a while, Dad. Your identity is compromised. Every extremist in the country knows who you are now." Bobby had expected this. The quiet life he'd built in Millville was over another casualty of the day's events. "I understand," he said simply. After ending the call, Bobby found Sheriff Rogers waiting respectfully nearby. "Hell of a day," the sheriff remarked. "Feels like I should apologize on behalf of the town, though I'm not sure for what." Bobby shook his head. "This wasn't Millville's fault. Or yours. Still," Rogers continued, "seems unfair. You came here for peace, built a life among us. Now this." Bobby looked back at his farmhouse, the home he and Sarah had chosen for their retirement, the place where he'd finally found some measure of peace after decades of violence. Now it was just another compromised safe house, its sanctity violated. "Life's rarely fair, Sheriff. Something you learn in our line of work." Rogers nodded thoughtfully. "What will you do now?" "Whatever's necessary," Bobby replied, the weight of 50 years of service evident in his voice. As federal helicopters appeared on the horizon, Bobby Keegan stood on his porch one last time, mentally saying goodbye to the life he'd built here. The legendary ghost would need to disappear again, become someone new, somewhere else. But first, there was Elizabeth to consider. His daughter would need protection now, too, her connection to him making her a potential target for Tyler's followers. And beyond that, there was the matter of the nationwide threats the brigade had inspired. Bobby might have retired from official service years ago, but he recognized the look in Elizabeth's voice over the phone. She needed his expertise, his experience in tracking networks like the one Tyler had built. The day had begun with Bobby Keegan, retired veteran and quiet neighbor. It would end with the return of the ghost, the operative who had spent decades in the shadows, protecting his country from threats both foreign and domestic. As the helicopters drew closer, Bobby squared his shoulders. One last mission. For Elizabeth. For the country he'd served his entire life. In the lead helicopter, Dr. Elizabeth Keegan watched the approaching shoreline, her father's property coming into view. The morning's events had transformed her professional life, exposing a traitor in her ranks, forcing emergency operations across multiple states, and bringing her face to face with the man who had targeted her father out of decades-old vengeance. But more significantly, it had transformed her personal understanding of the man who had raised her. She had always known about her father's service, his classified operations, his legendary status among certain circles in Washington. But seeing the aftermath of his actions today, neutralizing multiple terrorist threats at 72 years old, had given her a new appreciation for the depths of his capabilities. The man standing on the porch below, watching their approach with military stillness, was both the loving father who had taught her to fish in Lake Erie and the legendary operative whose methods were still taught at Quantico. Both were real. Both were essential parts of Robert Keegan. As the helicopter descended toward the cleared area of the front lawn, Elizabeth prepared herself for what would come next. The debriefings, the security protocols, the difficult conversations about her father's future. Tyler Mercer had been right about one thing, today had changed everything. But he had fundamentally misunderstood what that meant. He thought he'd destroyed Robert Keegan's life, forced him back into a world of violence and shadow. What he didn't understand was that Bobby Keegan had never truly left that world. He had simply found a way to live peacefully within it, maintaining his skills and connections while building something meaningful for himself. Now those skills would serve a new purpose, protecting the country from the very movement Tyler had inspired. The helicopter touched down, and Elizabeth emerged immediately, spotting her father. Their eyes met across the distance, the same piercing blue, the same unwavering resolve. In that moment, father and daughter recognized something fundamental in each other, the shared commitment that had defined both their lives. Different generations, different methods, but the same core purpose. As Elizabeth crossed the lawn toward Bobby, she saw him straighten imperceptibly, his bearing shifting from the retired neighbor back to the operator she needed him to be now. The ghost had returned, and this time he wouldn't be working alone. The federal helicopters descended onto Bobby's lakefront property, churning the autumn air into a frenzy of golden leaves and scattered pine needles. Men and women in tactical gear deployed with practiced efficiency, establishing a secure perimeter around the farmhouse that had until today been simply a quiet retirement home. Bobby watched the proceedings with detached professionalism, mentally cataloging equipment, assessing command structure, identifying the agents with actual field experience versus those who merely wore the uniform. Old habits never truly disappeared. They just waited beneath the surface, ready to emerge when needed. Elizabeth approached from the lead helicopter, her bearing, both professional and personal, the director of Homeland Security, and a daughter roles now inseparably intertwined by the day's events. Her tailored suit and swept-back hair couldn't hide the resemblance to Bobby. The same piercing blue eyes, the same set of the jaw when faced with difficult circumstances. "Dad," she said, simply embracing him with uncharacteristic public emotion. "Lizzie," he replied, using the childhood nickname that still emerged in their most honest moments. They separated quickly, both aware of the eyes upon them. Elizabeth transitioned seamlessly into her professional persona. "We have a command center established at the Millville Municipal Building. Tyler Mercer is being transported to a secure holding facility in Pittsburgh for preliminary interrogation, then on to a federal black site." Bobby nodded, absorbing the information. "And his network, active in 6 states that we've confirmed, possibly more. We've detained 17 brigade members here in Millville, plus another 43 associates across the region." A junior agent approached, clearly intimidated by Elizabeth's rank, but compelled by duty to interrupt. "Director Keegan, the secretary, is on the secure line." Elizabeth gave her father a look laden with unspoken meaning. "I'll be right there." To Bobby, she added, "We'll talk more at the command center." As she walked away, Sheriff Rogers appeared at Bobby's side, watching the federal operation unfold across the property. "Your daughter," he remarked. "Seems she inherited more than just your eyes." Bobby allowed himself a small smile. "She's better than I ever was. Smarter, more diplomatic." Rogers gestured toward the house. "They're saying you can't come back here. That it's not safe." "They're right." The sheriff shook his head slowly. 15 years you've been part of this town. Donated to every charity, helped rebuild after the flood in 19, never missed a town meeting. And in one day, these bastards take it all away from you. "Not everything," Bobby replied. His gaze found Maria and Phil now conferring with federal agents near the boathouse. "Some things can't be taken." A young federal agent approached his manor, suggesting recent academy graduation. "Mr. Keegan, we have transport ready for you, sir. Director Keegan asked that you be brought to the command center." Bobby nodded, taking one last look at the home he would never return to. The porch where he'd watched countless sunsets. The dock where he'd taught Elizabeth to fish on her rare visits. The garden Sarah had planned, but never lived to see completed. "I'm ready," he said, turning away from the past. The Millville Municipal Building had transformed into a federal command center with remarkable speed. What had once been a sleepy, small-town government office now hummed with the energy of a wartime operation. Computer stations filled the main conference room, satellite communications equipment dominated the roof, and armed agents secured every entrance. Bobby entered this controlled chaos with the quiet confidence of a man returning to familiar territory. Heads turned as he passed, whispers following in his wake. To most of these young agents, the ghost was a legend from training manuals and classified history lessons. Now he walked among them, older than in the stories, but unmistakably the same man. In the mayor's office, now repurposed as a secure briefing room, Elizabeth waited with the operational leadership. Phil and Maria had arrived ahead of Bobby, their presence indicating the unusual nature of this crisis. Retired operatives didn't typically participate in active federal operations unless the situation demanded exceptions to protocol. "Bobby." Phil greeted him with the casual familiarity of decades. "Feels like Beirut in '83, doesn't it? Except with better coffee and more computers." Elizabeth cleared her throat, reclaiming the room's attention. "We have an evolving situation. The brigade's activities today weren't isolated incidents. They were the opening moves in a coordinated domestic terror campaign." She gestured toward the digital map, displaying red indicators across the eastern United States. Each marker represents confirmed brigade activity or chatter in the past 6 hours. Bobby studied the map, recognizing the strategic pattern. They're targeting infrastructure and symbolic locations, pipeline junctions, power distribution nodes, community gathering places, maximum psychological impact with minimal resources. "Exactly," Elizabeth confirmed. "Tyler Mercer planned this meticulously. The attack on Millville on you personally was designed to activate sleeper cells across the region." She pulled up a document on the main screen, Tyler Mercer's manifesto, released simultaneously to extremist message boards and select media outlets. He names you specifically Dad, calls you the embodiment of the deep state shadow government, and details operations you participated in dating back to the 70s. Some are accurate, others are fabricated. Bobby scanned the document impassively. Most of these operations remain classified. He had inside help beyond just Deputy Director Harris. "We believe so. Harris is cooperating, but claims he only provided limited information about your whereabouts and current status. The operational details came from somewhere else." Maria leaned forward. Conrad Mercer had connections to former intelligence officers who went rogue after Vietnam. Some joined his compound in Montana. If any survived the Operation Orion raid, they could have maintained those connections, Bobby finished, passing information to Tyler over the years. Elizabeth nodded. That's our working theory. But right now, we need to focus on the immediate threat. Tyler's manifesto includes coded instructions for brigade cells' activation times, target priorities, operational parameters. Have you broken the code? Bobby asked. Partially. We know there's a major coordinated attack planned within the next 12 hours. We've identified several potential targets, but we're missing something critical. Phil studied the manifesto. It's a book code, old school. The reference text would be something personal to Tyler and his followers. Bobby's mind worked through the possibilities, drawing on decades of experience with terrorist communications. Conrad Mercer's journals. They were considered scripture among his followers. I read them after the raid, apocalyptic ramblings mixed with tactical instructions. Those journals were destroyed in the compound fire, Maria objected. The originals, yes, but Conrad made his lieutenants memorize key passages. They would have passed those teachings to Tyler. Elizabeth turned to her communications specialist. See if the NSA archives have reconstructed versions of Conrad Mercer's writings from the intelligence gathered before Operation Orion. Bobby approached the map, studying the pattern of brigade activity. Even without the specific code, the pattern suggests priority targets. Major pipeline junctions in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Michigan. Power distribution centers serving urban areas. And he paused, a cold realization forming. Elizabeth, where are they holding Tyler for interrogation? Pittsburgh Federal Building. Why? That's their primary target. Tyler planned to get captured. The attacks today were designed to ensure he'd be taken to a high-value federal facility. The room fell silent as the implications registered. Elizabeth recovered first. You think the entire brigade operation is a Trojan horse, Bobby confirmed grimly. Get Tyler inside a federal building filled with law enforcement and intelligence personnel, then hit it with everything they have. Maximum symbolic impact. Maximum damage to federal response capabilities. Phil nodded slowly. Makes sense. Conrad Mercer was obsessed with martyrdom operations. Like father, like son. Elizabeth immediately activated her secure communications. This is Director Keegan, Priority Alpha. Evacuate all federal facilities in Pittsburgh immediately. Particular emphasis on the federal building. Prisoner Tyler Mercer is to be transferred to Secure Site Echo under Delta protocols. She turned back to the room. If Bobby's right, we have hours at most before they move on the Pittsburgh facility. They'll have contingencies, Bobby warned. If they can't reach Tyler at the federal building, they'll target his transport or any secondary holding location. Then we need to change the game, Elizabeth decided. Make them react to us instead of following their plan. She fixed her gaze on her father. I need your help. Officially. Bobby understood what she was asking. After 15 years of retirement, she wanted him back in the field not as a consultant or advisor, but as an operational asset. The ghost returned from the shadows for one final mission. Whatever you need, he said simply. Elizabeth turned to her team. I want a complete operational plan in 30 minutes. We're going to use the brigade's own strategy against them. As the federal team dispersed to their assignments, Bobby found himself alone with his daughter for the first time since the helicopters had landed. You don't have to do this, Elizabeth said quietly. We have good people, trained agents. None who understand Tyler Mercer like I do, Bobby replied. I ended his father's threat. I need to end his. Elizabeth studied him with the penetrating gaze she'd inherited from him. This isn't just professional for you anymore. It's personal. It became personal the moment he targeted Millville. These people took me in, gave me a home when I thought I'd never have one again after your mother died. I owe them. Something in his expression must have revealed more than he intended, because Elizabeth placed a gentle hand on his arm. Dad, after this is over, you know you can't come back here. Your identity is compromised. The life you built, I know, Bobby said simply. The weight of that loss settled into his bones, joining the catalog of sacrifices accumulated over a lifetime of service. Elizabeth hesitated, then added, You could come to Washington. I have secure properties protection details. We could see each other more often. The offer touched him deeply, his daughter inviting him back into her life after years of necessary distance. But they both knew it wasn't that simple. Let's focus on stopping Tyler first, Bobby suggested. Then we'll figure out what comes next. The operational planning proceeded with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine. Elizabeth had assembled an exceptional team, Bobby noted with paternal pride. Young, yes, but sharp and adaptable. They listened to the insights from Bobby, Phil, and Maria without the ego or resistance he'd often encountered from younger agents in his day. The plan that emerged was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of evacuating federal facilities and creating panic, potentially signaling to the brigade that their plot had been discovered, they would conduct what appeared to be a routine prisoner transfer. Tyler would be moved from the Pittsburgh Federal Building to a convoy supposedly headed for a secure facility in West Virginia. But the convoy would be a decoy. The real Tyler would be transported by an unmarked team led personally by Bobby, taking an entirely different route to a black site in rural Maryland. The brigade will have surveillance on the federal building, Bobby noted during the final briefing. They'll see the convoy preparations and assume their plan is proceeding accordingly. Meanwhile, Elizabeth continued, we'll have tactical teams positioned along both routes ready to intercept any brigade attackers. Phil studied the transport route Bobby would take. They'll have contingencies fallback plans. If the federal building attack fails, we need to be prepared for pursuit. That's why I want you with Bobby, Elizabeth said. Your experience with pursuit interception is unmatched. Maria will coordinate surveillance from here, providing real-time intelligence on brigade movements. Bobby glanced at his watch. When do we move? 2 hours, after sunset. Gives us optimal visual coverage while minimizing civilian exposure. As the meeting concluded, Bobby sought out Sheriff Rogers, who had been included in the briefing due to his local knowledge and proven loyalty. I need a favor, Bobby told him quietly. Name it. Marge at the diner. Check on her tomorrow. Tell her... Bobby paused, considering his words carefully. Tell her, I'm sorry, I won't make it for apple pie on Sunday. Rogers nodded, understanding the deeper meaning. I'll look after her. And your house too, until you decide what to do with it. Thank you, Jim. The two men shook hands, no further words needed between them. As twilight descended over western Pennsylvania, Bobby prepared for what might be his final operation. In the municipal building's locker room, he changed into tactical gear that felt both foreign and familiar against his aged body. The weight of the body armor, the snug fit of the utility belt, the reassuring presence of weapons he'd hoped never to use again, all of it awakened muscle memories from decades of service. Phil joined him similarly equipped. At 70, the weapons specialist moved with the deliberate precision of a man who knew his limitations, but remained confident in his capabilities. Just like old times, Phil remarked, checking the action on his sidearm. Let's hope not, Bobby replied dryly. Old times usually ended with one of us in a field hospital. Phil laughed. Fair point. Still beats sitting around complaining about arthritis. Bobby holstered his weapon, then reached into his pocket for the one personal item he'd requested, Sarah's wedding ring, which he kept on a chain around his neck since her passing. He kissed it once before tucking it beneath his tactical gear. Elizabeth entered now dressed in operational attire rather than her director's suit. The transformation was striking from bureaucrat to field commander in an instant. "Transport team is ready," she reported. "Tyler has been prepped for movement from the federal building. Decoy convoy departs in 30 minutes. Bobby nodded. "And our team, loading now. We move out separately in unmarked vehicles, rendezvous at Extraction Point Charlie for the prisoner transfer." The clinical terminology didn't mask the reality of what they were doing, placing themselves directly in the crosshairs of a terrorist organization that had demonstrated sophisticated planning and resources. Every aspect of this operation carried risk, particularly for Bobby, who would be transporting the very man who had orchestrated attacks against him personally. Elizabeth hesitated, then added, "The Secretary has authorized full operational discretion. If the brigade attempts to intercept or rescue Tyler—" "I understand," Bobby said quietly. They drove separately to the rendezvous point, an abandoned warehouse outside Pittsburgh that the FBI had used for covert operations in the past. The decoy convoy had departed on schedule, traveling with full lights and security presence deliberately visible to any watching eyes. Bobby arrived first, conducting a thorough sweep of the perimeter before signaling the all-clear. Phil took up position as overwatch, his sniper skills undiminished by age. The prisoner transport arrived precisely on schedule, a nondescript van with federal agents who had brought Tyler from the federal building through a secret underground passage, avoiding the main entrance where brigade surveillance would be watching. Bobby observed as the agents transferred a shackled Tyler Mercer to their custody. The prisoner's composed demeanor faltered momentarily when he recognized Bobby among the receiving team. "The ghost himself," Tyler remarked, recovering quickly. "I'm flattered they sent you to escort me." Bobby ignored the taunt, securing Tyler in the transport vehicle, an unmarked SUV with reinforced armor and specialized communications equipment. Phil joined them, taking the driver's position while Bobby sat in the rear with Tyler. "You think you've won," Tyler said conversationally as they began moving. "Disrupted the grand plan. Saved the day." "Be quiet," Bobby instructed flatly. Tyler smiled at the expression never reaching his eyes. "He said you lacked imagination. My father said you could only see the mission in front of you, never the larger strategy." Bobby remained impassive, though the words stirred something deep within his memory. Conrad Mercer had indeed said something similar during their final confrontation at the Montana compound. The convoy moved through the darkened countryside, maintaining secure communications with Elizabeth's command center. Regular check-ins confirmed the decoy convoy was proceeding without incident, perhaps too smoothly. "No brigade activity observed along the decoy route," came Maria's voice through the secure channel. "Possible they've identified the deception." Bobby tensed, scanning the road ahead. "Status on our route. Clear for now. Surveillance drones show no unusual traffic patterns or staging areas." Something felt wrong. The brigade had demonstrated sophisticated planning and intelligence capabilities throughout the day. It seemed unlikely they would fail to have contingencies for Tyler's transport. Unless— "Maria," Bobby said urgently, "check for unusual communications activity around the federal building after the decoy departure. Specifically, secure government channels." A tense minute passed before Maria responded. There was a burst transmission on a restricted frequency, brief, encrypted. "They have someone inside the transport team," Bobby concluded grimly. "They know about both routes." Phil accelerated slightly, his experienced hands steady on the wheel. "How long until they intercept? Unknown. But we need to change the plan." Bobby made a quick decision. New destination. Transmitting coordinates now. He sent the location through his secure device, a private hunting cabin owned by Phil, deep in the Allegheny forest. Remote defensible, and known to almost no one. Understood, Elizabeth's voice confirmed. Diverting support teams to your new location. ETA 40 minutes. Bobby turned his attention to Tyler, who watched the exchange with undisguised interest. Problems with the plan, Ghost? He asked mockingly. Nothing we can't handle. You still don't see it, do you, the bigger picture? My people aren't trying to free me. That was never the objective. A cold certainty settled in Bobby's stomach. What is the objective, Tyler? Tyler leaned forward, his restraints clinking softly. Bringing you out of retirement was just the first step. Making Elizabeth activate her emergency protocols was the second. Now the real players know exactly who to target and when. Bobby processed this revelation with growing alarm. The brigade isn't just after infrastructure or symbolic targets. The brigade is just one piece on the board, Tyler confirmed, clearly enjoying Bobby's realization. My father built a movement. I built a network. People in positions throughout the government, the military, law enforcement. People who've waited decades for the right moment. Bobby activated his communications immediately. Elizabeth, we have a situation. Tyler claims the brigade is a front for a larger conspiracy within the government. The attacks today were designed to reveal the emergency response chain of command. Before Elizabeth could respond, the night erupted in violence. A blinding flash illuminated the road ahead as an explosion tore through the asphalt. Phil reacted instantly, swerving to avoid the crater while maintaining control of the vehicle. Ambush! He shouted unnecessarily. Gunfire raked the reinforced SUV bullets, pinging off the armored exterior. Bobby drew his weapon, shielding Tyler with his body not out of concern for the prisoner, but to preserve their primary intelligence source. 3 vehicles, Phil reported tersely. Tactical positioning. These aren't brigade thugs. Bobby recognized the attack pattern immediately. Military training. Special operations. Like I said, Tyler remarked calmly despite the chaos. A network. Phil executed a precision driving maneuver, cutting across a drainage ditch and accelerating down a Forest Service road. The pursuing vehicles followed their coordinated movements, confirming Bobby's assessment of their professional training. Elizabeth, Bobby transmitted through the secure channel. We're under attack. Professional operators, not brigade. Proceeding to alternate location. Send reinforcements. Static answered him. Their communications had been compromised. Jammers, Phil noted grimly. High-end equipment. Bobby made a rapid tactical assessment. With communications down and unknown numbers of hostiles in pursuit, their options were limited. The original plan was compromised. They needed to improvise. Head for the river, he instructed Phil. We'll use the old logging bridge. Phil nodded, understanding the strategy without further explanation. They had operated together for so long that words were often unnecessary. Tyler observed this exchange with calculating eyes. You think you can outrun them? These people have been planning this for years. Every contingency considered. Shut up, Bobby said flatly, the phrase echoing the confrontation at the diner that now seemed a lifetime ago. The SUV bounced along the rough forest road, headlights illuminating the dense trees on either side. Behind them, the pursuit vehicles had spread out, adopting a tactical formation designed to limit escape options. 2 miles to the bridge, Phil announced, handling the vehicle with the skill of a man who had driven through war zones on 3 continents. Bobby checked his weapons and equipment, mind racing through scenarios and options. The immediate priority was reaching defensible position where they could await reinforcements. But with communications jammed and an unknown number of hostiles, Pursuing the tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. "Whatever happens," he told Phil quietly, "Tyler doesn't fall into their hands. He's the key to unraveling this entire conspiracy." Phil nodded grimly. "Understood." The old logging bridge appeared ahead for a narrow wooden structure spanning a deep river gorge. Decades ago, it had served the timber industry. Now it stood as a forgotten relic, barely maintained and officially closed to traffic. Phil accelerated toward it without hesitation. The SUV hit the weathered planks with a teeth-rattling impact, the structure groaning beneath their weight. Halfway across, Phil braked suddenly. "End of the line," he announced, drawing his weapon. "We make our stand here." Bobby understood the strategy immediately. The bridge created a natural choke point the pursuers couldn't approach without exposing themselves to defensive fire, but it also limited their own retreat options. "Out," Bobby ordered, pulling Tyler from the vehicle. The night air was crisp with autumn chill as they positioned themselves behind the SUV. Tyler, still shackled, watched with clinical interest as the two elderly operatives prepared for battle with the efficiency of men half their age. "Impressive," he remarked, "but futile. You're outnumbered and outgunned." "We've faced worse odds," Phil replied, checking his rifle's scope. The headlights of the pursuit vehicles illuminated the trees at the bridge entrance. They had stopped recognizing the tactical situation. Trained operators wouldn't rush blindly into a potential kill zone. Minutes passed in tense silence. Bobby used the time to assess their position, identifying potential vulnerabilities and defensive advantages. The bridge offered limited cover, but the darkness and their elevated position provided some tactical benefits. "What's their play?" Phil murmured, scanning the tree line through his scope. "They'll try to flank us," Bobby predicted. "Send teams to cross the river upstream and downstream approach from multiple angles." "While keeping us pinned here with suppressing fire," Phil agreed. "Classic encirclement." As if on cue, gunfire erupted from the tree-line rounds, impacting the SUV and bridge structure around them. Bobby and Phil returned fire with disciplined bursts targeting muzzle flashes in the darkness. Tyler had pressed himself against the bridge railings, his expression shifting between fear and fascination as he witnessed the ghost in action. The legend his father had described was now fighting for his life, mere feet away. The firefight intensified the attackers, employing coordinated fire and movement techniques that confirmed Bobby's assessment of their professional training. These were no common terrorists or militia members. These were operators with advanced tactical knowledge. "We need to move," Bobby decided, as the angle of incoming fire began to change, indicating the flanking maneuver he had predicted. "They're getting into position around us." Phil nodded, reaching into his tactical vest to retrieve a small device. "I'll buy us some time." The former weapons specialist activated the device, a specialized flashbang grenade modified with a programmable delay. He slid it beneath the SUV, then signaled Bobby toward the far end of the bridge. Bobby grabbed Tyler, forcing him to move. "Unless you want to die on this bridge, you start running when I tell you." The three men made their way toward the far bank, staying low behind the minimal cover of the bridge railings. When they reached the midpoint, Phil triggered the device. The explosion was more powerful than a standard flashbang, ripping through the SUV's fuel tank and creating a wall of flame that temporarily blocked the bridge. In the chaos and illumination, Bobby identified movement in the trees below the flanking teams, just as he'd predicted. "Now," he ordered, pushing Tyler forward. They sprinted for the far bank, bullets splintering the wooden planks around them. Phil provided covering fire, his marksmanship forcing the attackers to seek cover. As they reached the tree line on the far side, Bobby heard Phil grunt in pain. Turning, he saw his old friend clutching his side, dark blood seeping between his fingers. "I'm fine," Phil insisted before Bobby could speak. "Flesh wound. Keep moving." The dense forest provided better cover as they pushed deeper into the wilderness. Behind them, the burning SUV created a temporary barrier, but Bobby knew it wouldn't delay trained pursuers for long. "Where are we going?" Tyler demanded, his earlier composure cracking under the stress of flight. "Somewhere they won't expect," Bobby replied tersely, helping Phil navigate the rough terrain. They moved through the forest with the efficiency of men who had spent lifetimes in hostile environments. Even wounded Phil maintained pace, though Bobby noted with concern the growing bloodstain on his friend's tactical vest. After 30 minutes of grueling progress, they reached their destination, an abandoned hunting shelter nestled in a rocky outcropping. The simple structure offered minimal comfort but maximum defensive position, with clear sight lines to the surrounding forest and only one approach path. "Home, sweet home," Phil remarked dryly as they entered the musty interior. Bobby secured Tyler to a support beam, then turned his attention to Phil's wound. The bullet had passed through the fleshy part of his side, painful but not immediately life-threatening if they could control the bleeding. "Like Kandahar in '01, Phil commented, as Bobby dressed the wound with supplies from his tactical kit. "Kandahar was worse," Bobby reminded him. "You had 2 bullets in you, and we were surrounded by an entire Taliban company." "Good times." Tyler watched this exchange with undisguised curiosity. "You two really are the legends my father described. I thought he was exaggerating." Bobby ignored him, focusing on Phil's wound. "Rest. I'll take first watch." Outside the shelter, Bobby surveyed their surroundings. The forest had fallen unnaturally quiet. The pursuers were out there methodically searching. Given their apparent training level, it wouldn't take them long to locate the shelter. His thoughts turned to Elizabeth. By now she would know they were missing. Federal resources would be mobilizing, but with their communications jammed and their location unknown, help would come too late unless they could re-establish contact. Bobby checked his satellite phone again, still no signal. The jammers were powerful with extensive range, more evidence that they faced an adversary with significant resources and planning capabilities. Inside the shelter, he found Phil sitting upright, weapon ready despite his injury. Tyler remained secured to the support beam, his earlier mockery replaced by watchful calculation. "They're moving in a standard search pattern," Bobby reported. "Teams of 2 maintaining communications discipline. Professionals." Phil nodded. "Options." Bobby considered their situation with the cold logic that had kept him alive through decades of operations. "We're outnumbered, outgunned, with a wounded man and a high-value prisoner. Conventional tactics say we hold position and wait for extraction." "But," Phil prompted, knowing his friend well enough to hear the unspoken qualification, "but conventional won't work here. We need to change the dynamic." Tyler laughed softly. "Finally thinking like my father said you couldn't. But it's too late, Ghost. My network has been planning this for decades, every contingency accounted for." Bobby approached Tyler, studying him with the penetrating gaze that had broken hardened operatives during interrogations. "Every contingency except one. You never expected to be the vulnerable link in your own plan." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Tyler's features. "What do you mean?" "Your people want you alive. That's why they haven't simply bombed this position or used heavier weapons. You're valuable to them, which means you're valuable to me." Bobby turned to Phil. "We're going to use their own strategy against them. Make them react to us instead of following their plan." Phil grinned despite his pain. "Just like Beirut." "Better than Beirut," Bobby corrected. "This time we have home field advantage." Working quickly, Bobby repurposed equipment from their tactical kits. Years in special operations had taught him to improvise with limited resources, a skill that had saved his life numerous times in hostile territory. "Your people have thermal imaging," he said to Tyler as he worked. "Standard equipment for an operation like this. But thermal has weaknesses." Tyler's expression revealed nothing, but his silence confirmed Bobby's assessment. "They'll find this shelter soon enough," Bobby continued. "But they won't know exactly what's waiting for them inside." When the preparations were complete, Bobby outlined the plan to Phil. His old friend listened, then nodded his approval. "Risky," Phil commented. "But when haven't we taken risks?" "Never," Bobby admitted with the ghost of a smile. "But we're still here." To Tyler, he said simply, "Time to earn your keep." The night had deepened around the hunting shelter, the forest cloaked in near total darkness. Bobby positioned himself at the single window, watching for movement among the trees. Beside him, Phil maintained his vigil, despite the pain of his wound. They didn't have to wait long. The pursuers had located the shelter, their movements betrayed by the subtle shifting of shadows among the trees. Bobby counted at least 6 operators establishing positions around the small clearing. "Right on schedule," he murmured. A voice called from the darkness. "Robert Keegan, we have you surrounded. Release Tyler Mercer, and you might survive the night." Bobby exchanged glances with Phil. The use of his full name confirmed what Tyler had suggested. These were people with intimate knowledge of his identity and history. "Who am I speaking with?" Bobby called back. A pause, then, "Someone who knows what you did to Conrad Mercer. Someone who's waited a long time for this moment." "If you know what I did to Conrad, you know what I'm capable of," Bobby replied. "Tyler stays with me." Another pause, longer this time. Bobby could almost feel the tactical calculations being made in the darkness. Finally, the voice returned. "You're outnumbered and surrounded. Your communications are jammed. No help is coming. Be reasonable, Ghost." The use of his operational codename was another confirmation of their adversary's inside knowledge. But it also revealed something else, a personal element to this confrontation, an emotional investment beyond professional objectives. "Here's my offer," Bobby called. "Tyler has information about a conspiracy reaching into the highest levels of government. I want safe passage for myself and my wounded colleague. In return, you get Tyler, and the information dies with us." The silence that followed suggested his words had hit their mark. The offer created uncertainty, forced the adversary to reconsider their approach. Finally, the voice responded. "How do we know Tyler hasn't already told you everything?" "You trained with Conrad Mercer," Bobby replied. "You know his protocols for compartmentalizing information. Tyler follows the same principles. The full network is known only to him." More silence. Then, "Throw out your weapons. Come out with Tyler. We'll discuss terms." Bobby smiled grimly. The response told him everything he needed to know. They wanted Tyler alive, and the information contained exactly as he had predicted. "No," he called back. "You send one man to the door, unarmed. We talk face to face." The standoff continued for several tense minutes. Bobby could almost hear the debate occurring among the operators surrounding the shelter. Finally, movement at the edge of the clearing, a single figure approaching, slowly, hands visible. "Right on cue," Phil murmured. As the figure neared, Bobby recognized the confident stride of a man accustomed to command. Tall, gray-haired, with the bearing of a career military officer. When he reached the pool of faint light near the shelter door, Bobby finally saw his face. "Colonel Thomas Reynolds," Bobby said quietly, recognizing the man from intelligence briefings decades earlier. "I thought you died in the compound fire with Conrad." Reynolds smiled thinly. "Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated. Conrad made sure certain members of his inner circle escaped before your team arrived. To continue his work, Bobby surmised, to build something far beyond what Conrad imagined, Reynolds corrected. A network within the system itself, patient, invisible, positioned for the perfect moment. Bobby studied the man who had spent decades plotting revenge and insurrection. And you think that moment has arrived. Tyler's operation today confirmed it. We identified every emergency response protocol, every secure facility, every chain of command. When the main event begins, we'll decapitate federal response capabilities in a single stroke. The casual way Reynolds revealed this plan suggested confidence or arrogance. Either way, it provided Bobby with critical intelligence about the scope of the conspiracy. "And what exactly is the main event, Colonel?" Reynolds laughed softly. "You'll find out soon enough. Now, where is Tyler?" "Safe," Bobby replied. "And valuable to both of us. Bring him out, Keegan. You're surrounded wounded with no extraction coming. This ends only one way." Bobby allowed a slight smile. "That's where you're wrong, Colonel. It ends the way I decide it ends. It always has." Reynolds' expression hardened. "You're not in your prime anymore, Ghost. You're an old man far from home." "True," Bobby acknowledged. "But this old man has one advantage you've overlooked." "And what's that?" "I've spent 15 years in these woods. I know every tree, every trail, every hiding spot." Bobby's smile widened slightly. "And I know exactly where my daughter's tactical team is positioned right now." Uncertainty flickered across Reynolds's face for the first time. "You're bluffing. Your communications are jammed." "Are they?" Bobby held up a small device, a specialized signal booster Phil had modified from their equipment. "We re-established contact 20 minutes ago. Federal tactical teams have been moving into position since then." Reynolds's hand moved subtly toward his waistband, reaching for a concealed weapon. "I wouldn't," Bobby advised quietly. "Sniper has you targeted. Has since you stepped into the clearing." As if to confirm his words, a red laser dot appeared on Reynolds's chest. Reynolds froze, his tactical mind reassessing the situation. "Even if what you say is true, my people are still out there. They'll kill you before your teams can reach you." "Maybe," Bobby conceded, "but you'll be dead. Tyler will be in federal custody, and your main event will fail. Is that the outcome Conrad trained you for failure?" The psychological pressure was calculated, targeting the man's dedication to a cause he'd served for decades. Bobby watched as Reynolds processed the shifting tactical reality. "My offer stands," Bobby continued. "Safe passage for me and Phil. You get Tyler and whatever information he holds." Reynolds considered for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Agreed. But if this is a trick—" "It isn't," Bobby assured him. "Tyler is all yours." He stepped back into the shelter, returning moments later with Tyler Mercer in tow. The younger man appeared unharmed but strangely calm, given the circumstances. "Colonel," Tyler greeted Reynolds with obvious familiarity. "You weren't supposed to get captured," Reynolds reprimanded. Tyler shrugged. "Plans evolve. The primary objectives were achieved." Bobby released Tyler's restraints, allowing him to step toward Reynolds. As the two conspirators stood together, something passed between them, a look that triggered Bobby's instincts, honed through decades of reading human behavior. "Now our passage," Bobby reminded them. Reynolds gestured toward the forest. "My men will allow you through to the eastern perimeter. After that, you're on your own." Bobby nodded, turning back toward the shelter to help Phil. As he did, he caught Tyler's slight hand movement, a signal to Reynolds that confirmed his suspicions. They had never intended to honor the agreement. Bobby's reaction was instantaneous. As Reynolds reached for his weapon, Bobby was already in motion, delivering a precision strike to the older man's throat. Reynolds stumbled backward, gasping as Tyler lunged for Bobby. But Bobby had anticipated this betrayal. His counterattack was fluid, efficient, the culmination of a lifetime spent in combat. Tyler, for all his planning and resources, had never faced an opponent of Bobby's caliber in direct confrontation. The fight was brief but intense. Tyler possessed the advantages of youth and strength, but Bobby had experience and economy of movement. Each strike was calculated, each defensive maneuver designed to conserve energy while maximizing impact. When it ended, Tyler lay unconscious on the ground, and Reynolds was struggling to breathe through his damaged windpipe. "The problem with conspiracies," Bobby told the gasping colonel, "is that they make you predictable." Conrad never understood that either. From the surrounding forest came the sounds Bobby had been waiting for: helicopters, approaching vehicles moving into position, federal agents calling out identification and orders. Elizabeth's voice carried over a bullhorn. "Federal agents, drop your weapons and surrender. The area is surrounded." Reynolds stared at Bobby with hatred and dawning realization. There was never any deal. "There was never any need for one," Bobby replied calmly. "While you were focused on me, my daughter's teams were tracking your men through the forest. The jamming equipment has been located and disabled. Your operation is compromised." The full tactical response descended upon the clearing helicopters, with spotlights, federal agents in full gear, medical teams for the wounded. The remaining members of Reynolds' team were quickly apprehended, their superior training meaningless against overwhelming federal resources. Elizabeth approached professional, as always, despite the personal connection. "Secure," she confirmed, eyeing the unconscious Tyler and the restrained Reynolds. "All hostiles in custody." Bobby nodded, then turned toward the shelter. "Phil needs medical attention. Gunshot wound to the right side." As medics rushed to attend to his friend, Bobby finally allowed himself to feel the accumulated exhaustion of the day's events. His body, strong for 72, but still subject to the limitations of age, ached from exertion and combat. But his mind remained sharp, processing the implications of what they had discovered. "Reynolds mentioned a main event," he told Elizabeth quietly. "Something beyond today's attacks. Tyler's operation was just preparation, identifying response protocols, and secure facilities." Elizabeth's expression darkened. "We'll get it out of them. Between Reynolds and Tyler, we'll unravel the entire network." Bobby nodded, watching as federal agents led the still-dazed Tyler toward a waiting transport vehicle. "They've been planning this for decades, Lizzie, placing people throughout the system. It won't be easy to identify them all. And then it's fortunate we have the legendary Ghost to help us," Elizabeth replied, allowing a brief smile to crack her professional demeanor. As dawn broke over the Allegheny forest, Bobby stood beside his daughter, watching the operation conclude. Federal teams had secured all brigade-related threats across 6 states. Tyler Mercer and Thomas Reynolds were in custody, their network exposed and vulnerable. The immediate danger had passed. "What happens now?" Bobby asked quietly. Elizabeth considered the question. "Officially, you'll be debriefed, then placed in protective custody until we can establish a new identity and location for you. Millville isn't safe anymore." Bobby absorbed this with the stoicism of a man accustomed to sacrifice. And unofficially, Elizabeth met his gaze directly. "I need your help, Dad. This conspiracy goes deeper than we realized. Reynolds and Tyler are just the visible elements. There are others hidden throughout the government and military. Finding them all will take someone with your experience." "You're offering me a job," Bobby observed with faint amusement. "I'm offering you a purpose," Elizabeth corrected, "and a chance for us to work together. something we've never really had. The prospect stirred something in Bobby that he hadn't felt in years, the sense of mission, of meaningful service. But beyond that was something more personal, the opportunity to know his daughter as a colleague and partner, not just as the child he'd raised, but then kept at arm's length for her own protection. "I'm a little old to return to field work," he noted dryly. Elizabeth smiled. "After what you accomplished today, I think you've still got some ghost left in you." As medical teams attended to Phil and federal agents secured the scene, Bobby considered his daughter's offer. The life he'd built in Millville was gone, another casualty of violence that had followed him despite his best efforts to leave it behind. But perhaps, in its place, a new chapter could begin. "One condition," he said finally. "When this is over, when we've dismantled Reynolds's network completely, I choose where I retire next. No arguments." "Deal," Elizabeth agreed immediately. "Where are you thinking?" Bobby looked toward the east, where the rising sun painted the sky in hues of gold and crimson. "Somewhere by water. I've gotten used to watching sunrises over a lake." A week later, Bobby stood in the Liberty Bell diner one last time. The morning crowd had cleared out, leaving just him and Marge at the counter. His possessions from the farmhouse had been packed and stored, his affairs in the town settled quietly. "Sure I can't convince you to stay?" Marge asked, refilling his coffee cup. "Sheriff Rogers says they caught all those awful men." Bobby smiled gently. "Better this way, Marge. My daughter needs my help with something important. And after that, well, who knows?" Marge studied him with the wisdom of a woman who had seen much in her 65 years. "You know, Bobby Keegan, I always suspected there was more to you than just a retired veteran who liked my apple pie. The way you carried yourself, the way you watched rooms." "Was I that obvious?" Bobby asked with genuine curiosity. "Only to those who knew what to look for." Marge slid a package across the counter, a freshly baked apple pie in a travel container. "For the road, and a reminder of what's waiting when you're ready to come back." Bobby accepted the gift with genuine emotion. "Thank you, Marge, for everything." Outside, Elizabeth waited in a government SUV, windows tinted against curious eyes. As Bobby slid into the passenger seat, she eyed the pie container with amusement. "Essential supplies," she teased. "National security depends on proper nutrition," Bobby replied with mock seriousness. As they drove away from Millville for the last time, Bobby allowed himself one backward glance at the town that had given him 15 years of peace. The Liberty Bell Diner, the municipal building where today's events had begun, the distant outline of his lakeside farmhouse. "We'll find them all," Elizabeth assured him correctly, reading his thoughts. "Reynolds, Tyler, their entire network. They won't hurt anyone else." Bobby nodded, turning his gaze forward. The mission ahead would be challenging, identifying and neutralizing a conspiracy decades in the making. But he would face it alongside his daughter, their skills and determination combined toward a common purpose. The ghost had returned from retirement, but this time he didn't walk alone.